3 notes per string, 7 notes, and all you have to remember is 7 patterns. Now, everything else out there in the music field is just slight variations on those patterns. Because essentially, this particular mode of theory is the Western civilization mode of theory. It's what America came up with. Every culture has their own theory or their own way to play music. If you've ever been to Asia or China, their scales are completely different. The chords are completely different because they divide the scales in a different sequence because that's just what happened. There really aren't any rules. Only thing that works out mathematically is that there's an even amount of notes divided between 2 octaves and their chords built over it. Does that make sense? Well, in a sense, yeah, there's these 7 notes, root, third, fifth, right? If you go to another culture, their major scale is completely jacked up. It doesn't go in the same order, but there's a sequence of notes that repeat between those 2 octaves, which make up their scale. And they build the chord off of those 7 notes. So rather than the chord being here, it might be here. And they have a different jacked up chord that goes with that does have a name, and it's named based on our culture because that's what's universally accepted. So their music is going to be compared to the way we approach theory. And that's when it gets really confusing because you're trying to look up an exotic scale. It'll say it's a minor scale with a raised 7th and a flat 6th and a major, you know, you're like, what? When in actuality, it's just move this finger here. You know what I mean? Rather than here. Like, this scale right here is a Hindu scale. I've played this scale for years. I didn't know it was a Hindu scale. I just accidentally hit a bad note, thought it sounded cool. I played a major third instead of a minor third in a minor scale, and I got that. This note isn't in the minor scale, but when I accidentally was just, you know, playing my normal E minor thing, see, I just kind of changed the whole direction of the melody just by changing 1 note. And that's it. You know, I looked it up later. It's a Hindu scale, where I just, you know, thought of it as that weird scale with the 1 different note. As your ear gets more strong, then you're get a little more adventurous and start to, you know, break the rules a little more because your ear is recognizing, hey, this works. I can get away with this. You know, you want to hit the wrong notes deliberately because it'll come across more confident. You know what I mean? If you hit a wrong note and you don't know it's a wrong note, generally people will know you're hitting a wrong note. You know what I mean? So, any questions so far? When I bend a string, I kind of try to use the what do I do? To keep the strings from making noise, I kind of try to rest my hand up against all the open strings so that they don't drone out while I'm playing. It's kind of like both the hands kind of work with each other. My palm is muting all of this, and the curve of my finger right here is kind of muting everything above the string. So if I bent a note right here, this finger right here is muting the high E string, and this hand is rested up on the body, muting everything in below. Now, one misconception about bending, everyone thinks that, you know, bending, okay, that's easy to do, right? You get to hear so many people doing this kind of thing. You know, they're bending a note and they're not quite. The whole point of bending, when you bend a note, you always want to bend for the next note in the scale. You know, and that's anywhere you go. If you're just, you know, even if I decide to bend a note here, the next note on the scale is here, right? I'll bend it. If it's only a half step up. Now, when you're bending a note, you can't just bend it to any random note. You got to know where you are, and that's where the 3-note per string scales come in handy, because chances are, whatever position you're in a 3-note per string position, and you can see the note above it, so you just bend right up to it. So as long as you memorize the 7 positions. You always want to know what note comes after where you're at. and what note comes before wherever your hand happens to be in any given moment. If I was just rocking out right here, as I'm doing that, right, that kind of pattern right there, I can visually see while I'm flailing there that I have a note here and I have a note here, right? Sorry, my action's bad. So no matter where I slide, I'm sliding to any of these one positions, and no matter where I land, my eyes are locked into this 3-note per string pattern. To give you an example, this is an exercise I used to do a lot to kind of enable me to get around randomly so that I can, you know, move to different positions stealth-like, you know, without everyone realizing, you know, you're flailing the lick and all of a sudden you stop, and then you're like, okay, all right, I'm going to go here now, and then you start playing here. You want to be able to just keep going. So licks like this, where essentially I'm going right up the line. I'm playing the last 6 notes of every mode position, just as a pattern, 3-note per string pattern. Then I'll slide up to the next position and descend with the last 6 in that position. Slide up 1, ascend 3. Slide up 1, descend 3. That sounds like a boring exercise, and I used to do it for hours. It sounds kind of boring when you're sitting there exercising and trying to get it clean, but by doing that, you kind of get more familiar with the neck, and you have a lot more options, and you're less likely to be stumped. Because I've seen a lot of guys, you know, they're flying and they run out of ideas. A lick like that kind of enables you to kind of get to a different position and break out of a rut, you know. So something like, now I'm slid up to that next position, and now I'm in a different scale position or a different mode position, depending on, you know, what chord I'm playing. But I'm in a different position, and I have different physical options to play, you know. Because once you start running out, you start running out of licks. Like, okay, maybe if I just moved to this position, there's that many more licks I can do, and you can do it seamlessly. Okay, now I'm starting to descend in this scale position. That's even single note licks, you know, where you go right down the line and just do this kind of. It's usually the most mundane exercise sounding things, but to give you the most bang for your buck. They're basically called, they're kind of sequences, I guess. You're familiar with that, like sequences at all? It's just you're basically playing a rhythmic mathematical pattern applied to a scale. So a lot of like the flashy licks, you know, like this kind of stuff. That's a sequence that kind of where it's the same concept, where I'm ascending the first 6 notes of that particular scale position, which in this case is the Phrygian position. You're not going to think of it that way, but and I'll slide up to the next scale position and play those 6 notes wherever I happen to be. Where it's just up 6, shifted the position to the next position 1 note higher, then up 6. About picking, for the fast stuff, you always want to go alternate. It's the whole economy of motion thing. It's like if you're running track, you wouldn't want to be running left, right, and then all of a sudden run With 1 foot, you'll fall on your face. Same thing with like speed picking. I find it has to be, if you're not doing legato, which is just hammer-ons and pull-offs, it has to be down, up, down, up, down, up. And before you practice it, try to consciously think of a sequence that's going to enable you to execute the lick easier. Like some licks will start just by merely starting with an upstroke might be easier to play or execute because of the physical anomalies of playing certain types of licks. Like, for instance, that kind of a lick right there. For speed, this is basically the lick that did it for me in terms of helping me develop it, was just this pattern where any three note per string pattern, a group of 6, you go up 4 and down. You start with a downstroke, down, up, down, up. Just over and over. And that's counted as a triplet, like you know, if you had a metronome, it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2. And the idea is to keep your hand completely relaxed. You don't want to tense up. The goal is slow with a metronome. Once you get comfortable with it, kick it up to a notch where you're almost not comfortable with it, get comfortable with it, until you're up to speed to where when you're playing it fast, it feels no different than playing it slow. And you got to have a lot of free time to do that, but I did growing up, so that's, you know. Another thing I consciously did too is any lick I learned picking, I'll try to learn it hammer-ons and pull-offs as well. So that same pattern, I'll pick one, hammer-on, up, hammer, pull-off, pull-off. So if you look, I start it with a downstroke, hammer on the rest, upstroke, downstroke, pull-off, pull-off. Now what that does, the reason why having that helps so much, if you watch players like NBA Malmsteen, it sounds like he's picking all the time. He's only picking half of the time. It gives his hand a chance to rest. Like when you're playing licks like that, if you're picking, all the muscle action's coming from the right hand, not so much on the left. This hand starts to get tired, but you don't want to stop, so you start doing legato with the left, and that gives your right hand the chance to rest. If you're not breathing, chances are you're probably already past the point of your physical limitations. Yeah, because then that means you're tensing up. There's a sense of anxiety, like, you know, like, oh, it's just not quite fast enough, and you're trying to go that extra edge, but it's not. You want to play it slow. The key to speed is playing slow, believe it or not, is just sitting there going. It's important having the right and left hand to sync up like that, so that every note is individual. And then if you practice it both ways, as well as legato, you can go back and forth between the two. Like, your turn to rest, your turn to rest, your turn to rest, you know, that kind of thing. And that's how you can just, like, keep going. But that's essentially how I developed my picking patterns like that. A lot of 6 patterns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then stuff like that. And the beauty of it is any triplet pattern in a 6-note pattern you can combine in any order. You can go between this one and this one. So. It's basically repeating. So as long as that it's clean and consistent, you know. Realistically, if you sat with the metronome for like an hour a day practicing those exercises, they'll come cleaner. If you practice 8 hours a day, it'll come quicker. But you know, who has time to do that? Luckily I did when I was 16 and 17, and my grades reflected that. But